So we are now going to be going on to panel number 7, which is Hindu youth. The panel theme is Hindu youth being the change today for a better tomorrow. I'm now going to introduce Riddhi Patel as the coordinator. Riddhi Patel is a General Secretary of Hindu Students Council. She joined HSC as a member of the UIC chapter in 2013 and has been active ever since. Riddhi, I'll now hand it over to you.
Namaste everyone. I would like to introduce the moderator of Youth Panel, Prasiddha Sudhakar. Prasiddha is a computer science and economic double major at Rutgers University. She's interested in civic technology and economic development. One of her many passions is leading advocacy initiatives with regards to Hindu issues. And in her free time, she enjoys to read, learn new languages, and spend time in outdoors.
Namaste, everyone. Thank you so much for being in our panel. So I'm going to start off by introducing all of the panelists today. So today, I'm going to start with Arnav. So Arnav Kejriwal currently serves as the president of Hindu Students Council, the oldest and largest organization for Hindu youth across North America. He was a part of the Youth Organizing Committee for World Hindu Congress 2018, held in Chicago. Arnav also published several youth papers in the World Association for Vedic Studies, presenting at global conferences in Trinidad and Tobago, New Jersey, and Iowa. So Arnav, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Namaste, and thank you, Prasiddha. Thank you, Riddhi. Thank you, Shoni. Thank you, VHPA, for this amazing conference. I guess I've been asked to share a few words on Hindu identity before we might go into the other panelists. So, you know, from my perspective of being part of the HSC team for the last 3 years, what does it mean to be a Hindu youth in America? And, you know, I look back in my time growing up in Dallas, which there were not a lot of Hindus that I went to school with. And I looked at Hindu identity and my American identity very separately. So whether it's for us, it might be Mandir, it might be Balvihar, it might be Chinmaya Mission, Shaka. You know, a lot of students in this country, Hindu American students growing up, might separate that Hindu identity from their American identity. And there's not really an easy way to reconcile the two, or they might not see that, especially if their parents aren't able to help them maybe navigate that challenge. So my biggest goal in HSC and being part of the HSC family is making sure that our students and our youth understand that we can go beyond the religious side of our culture. So go beyond just having our Hindu identity be part of our mandir visits, be part of going to doing puja, doing arti with the family. Go beyond just the festivals. How can we integrate that the Hindu upbringing, the Hindu side of our identity, that label? How can that be part of our broader identity that infuses with the rest of what we do? It's not just limited on the weekends or when we go to Chinmaya or the mandir. So a lot of what HSC and what the youth communities that I'm a part of, what we do are a lot of community building events, such as not just on campus, but also with the broader community. We do game nights, scholarly talks. We want to host academic conferences, very much like this one that VHPA has very amazingly put together during COVID. We host leadership summits, and we'll be having one in a few weeks, career talks, etc. But the goal being that we should find a way to bring that Hindu identity in line with the rest of our identity. It shouldn't be kind of two different subsections that don't intersect. And then going into what college students might experience, how do we get students to pick their Hindu identity over other kind of labels that this civilizational identity might be tied to, such as maybe the term Indian identity or South Asian identity. So what differs between the Hindu and that South Asian or Indian identity? So I'll stop there, Prasiddha, because I'm sure some of these questions will come out during the panel.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Arnav. So our next panelist is Danish Patel, who's going to be talking about changing the Hindu narrative through social media, in particular with regards to microaggressions and Hindu phobia. So Danish Patel is a recent graduate from Ohio State University with a Bachelor of Science in Cellular and Molecular Neuroscience. While at Ohio State, he was the vice president of Hindu Yuva at OSU. He is currently involved with the Education and Advocacy Team for Hindu Students Council and is also a part of the social media team for the Coalition of Hindus of North America. So Danish, over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. Namaste, everyone. Yes, like Prasiddha said, building our narrative is so important and very needed right now with this ongoing social media culture. Well, first we have to ask ourselves, what is our narrative? I've noticed on social media and online in general, a lot of people aren't aware of what our narrative is. And even if we have some version of our narrative, it's definitely not unified. Everyone seems to have their own kind of ideas about what message they want to push about Hindu Dharma. And this kind of puts us in a position, like a very weak in a position of social media compared to other communities. So I want to focus on some things we can do to insert ourselves in the mainstream narrative and actually create impact. So first, like I said, we need unity on social media. We have a lot of theological differences within our community, but it's time to put that aside in terms of social media outreach and unite together. And a lot of communities do this on social media. And I think that's why they're a lot more successful than the Hindu community online. We can focus on things like atrocities against Hindus, and not just in South Asia, but all around the world. I also see this problem on social media of our community kind of having this hyper focus on India and Indian politics only, but we need to reach out and make a broader global coalition to kind of highlight our issues. Another important thing we need is building networks. And whether we like it or not, social media, like influencer culture that's upcoming, it's educating the youth, the next generation youth, on trendy societal issues. So if we want our Hindu youth to not be brainwashed about Hindu issues, then we have to get involved and raise our voices through social media. And honestly, the Muslim community does an excellent job with this. They do an excellent job bringing unity to their community and building those key social media networks that really help them amplify their voices. For example, on Instagram, there's a page called @Muslim, and what they do is they have hundreds of thousands of followers with a huge network of Muslim social media influencers. So whenever something comes up in their community, all they have to do is put out a post, and all of these, this army of followers that they have and all the social media influencers, they just keep reposting the posts. And within like 24 hours, they'll get 1 million likes. And we can do the same thing as Hindu community, but we honestly haven't had that kind of a leverage from Hindu social media influencers. So doing this also requires a lot of proper etiquette in terms of social media. We can't be going around, vilifying other communities. We have to kind of be mindful of the language we use and the kind of rhetoric we use online. We kind of have to be artful and strategic in countering the narrative if we want people to care about our issues. So I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm sure we'll talk a lot more later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danish. So our next panelist is Amrita Hode, talking about virtue signaling and cultural appropriation. So Amrita lives in Boston, is from Atlanta, where her family lives. She currently works for a global health nonprofit organization called Partners in Health on mental health programs. Amrita completed her bachelor's in psychology from Georgia Tech, master's in psychology from Boston University, master's of public health from Columbia University. Over the years, she spent various periods of time volunteering with Seva International in Bharat. Amrita is a Sevika since childhood, and current responsibility is National Yuva Paramukh / National President of Hindu Yuva. So Amrita, over to you.
Thanks so much, Prasiddha, and namaste, everyone. It's wonderful to be with all of you here today and with such a great group of panelists. So I've been asked to speak a little bit about virtue signaling and cultural appropriation. We can delve into what exactly that means. We've seen bath mats with pictures of Ganesha, beer yoga, Om lower back tattoos, the color run. In the 1980s, 1990s, many of us might remember the Dot Busters gang in the New Jersey, New York area, whose name came from the bindi worn by Hindus. So how have we transformed from a society which identified Hindus as wearing bindis and attacked them and vandalized their home and their properties to a society where people wear bindis to Coachella and are deemed trendy or exotic and even get paid for it? We live in a globalized world where geographic boundaries don't prevent cultural exchange. It's become increasingly challenging, I think, to define what is cultural appropriation and what is cultural appreciation, what is virtue signaling, and what is an authentic integration of Hindu values. So we can start off maybe with some definitions so we're all on the same page. According to the Oxford Dictionary, cultural appropriation is the unacknowledged or inappropriate adoption of the customs, practices, ideas, etc., of one people or society by members of another, and typically more dominant people or society. Virtue signaling is the action or practice of publicly expressing opinions or sentiments intended to demonstrate one's good character or the moral correctness of one's position on a particular issue. Values, clothing, food, traditions don't have copyrights. So sometimes cultural appropriation can be very clear, and other times a bit blurry, but you can feel it. What do virtue signaling and cultural appropriation look like and feel like to me? I think when someone asks me if I've heard of a turmeric latte, I think you mean haldi doodh, the drink that my grandmother gives me to prevent any sickness, to benefit my health. As Hindu immigrants to the US, I think as many immigrants do, we've often taken the approach of assimilation. Assimilation is not only the adoption of behaviors, language, appearance, but the uptake of values and beliefs as well. I think growing up, I remember consistent messages in school or in the community about America being the land of the free, the land of opportunity, a melting pot. And I wonder if the melting pot has been taken too far. And I think this is particularly challenging for Hindus because intertwined into our values, our practices is acceptance, not tolerance, but acceptance. As a Hindu who's proud of her dharma and her history and her roots, I hope that our values spread far and wide. But should I be happy that millions are yoga practitioners now, no matter how it's practiced? Should I be happy that Ayurvedic practices are reaching the tables of so many? Should I be happy that words like guru, mantra, karma are a part of the daily lexicon? I think yes, I am happy about all of those. I'm glad there is awareness about the health benefits, about the devotion and love shown through millions singing bhajans, about the rise in consciousness through authentic yoga practice. But what I'm not happy about is the ignorance that's accompanied by it. And on top of that, the acceptance that the ignorance is fine. So I think I'll pause there. I think from all of the wonderful speakers on this panel and the upcoming questions, we'll get to delve into these points a little bit more and what we can do about them.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. So our final panelist that I'm going to introduce is Arushi Ramaka, talking about microaggressions against Hindu students in academia. So Arushi Ramaka is a junior at Montgomery High School. She is the president of the HSC chapter there and has been involved with the Hindu Students Council since 2019. Arushi is both a Kuchipudi dancer and Carnatic singer who is passionate about helping fellow Hindu Americans find community and be confident in their identity. She loves writing articles such as her recent manifesto on Hindu femininity. So Arushi, over to you.
Namaste everyone. Thank you, Prasiddha, and thank you everyone who's making this conference possible. So the topic I'm going to speak about is something that me and a lot of my peers at the Hindu Students Council chapter at Montgomery know all too much about, which is microaggressions against Hindu students in academia, which could mean, the classroom in high school, the textbooks you get in 6th grade middle school, all the way up to PhD level in universities. So what exactly is a microaggression, right? Because for us, when we think about bigotry, bias, we are thinking about the gaslighting of victims of atrocities. We're thinking about the dotbusters. But not every manifestation of bias or Hinduphobia is as overt as that. many of this is microaggressions, which are basically small statements or actions that align with the Hindu-phobic narrative. And they have these double meanings that can confuse young Hindus a lot. For example, you might be learning about the Mahabharata in school, right? And if the teacher brushes it off as just a myth, this is a myth. For a Hindu student who has learned about the Mahabharata has a lot of ethical and moral and dharmic significance to you. In the Western context, a myth is something that has pagan connotations and is often a fantasy. That small sentence has a lot of impact on a young person who is suddenly very subtly told, and it's almost smart the way this is done, it's very subtly told that whatever they hold dear as their identity has no meaning in this Western world. And many times the reason why we cannot just brush it off, a lot of people would say that why should you care about ignorant people? There are always going to be people who don't want to accept others. Why should you care? Well, many teachers who are teaching content that is rich with microaggressions, and these microaggressions could be, for example, mentioning the caste system over and over again, only mentioning Hindu women to talk about sati and oppression, and leaving out goddesses, having yoga in your curriculum for gym, but not talking about contributions of Hindu philosophy. This leaving out of things and selectively kind of lying about certain things about Hinduism and teaching it as facts messes with young kids' identity and unfortunately causes identity crisis. And this is something that cannot be thought of logically. You cannot go to a child and be like, this is wrong and therefore you should not care. Unfortunately, and also fortunately, identity is a very emotional thing. And I think first and foremost to tackle this issue, we need to place our youth at our center. We need to be empathetic towards one another. We need to listen to one another. Then we have to go out there and educate. And I think I'll just leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Arushi. So I'm going to go on to just asking panelists some questions. I'm going to start with you, Arnav. So growing up in the US, what type of Hindu identity issues have you faced that you think are very common amongst Hindu American youth?
So I think there's kind of two major challenges that I want to bring up. Obviously, we face a lot of challenges like Arushi and Amrita mentioned. The two that I see the most commonly are one that, and it kind of depends which Hindus you're talking about, because there's the Hindus that are the Hindus that grow up in proud Hindu families, such as the ones that are going to be on a conference, such as this one, where they already come with that Hindu pride. Someone like that faces is they often get pigeonholed into their Hindu identity only being kind of related to the religious aspect of their lives. And they don't, it's going beyond kind of just the fact that they might choose to segregate those identities. A lot of times that decision's made for them. So at their schools, for instance, at my high school now, after I left, they now celebrate Diwali, but they call it an Indian festival, and they have a South Asian dance group there, right? And so the challenge that we face as Hindus is this is a major festival for us, and it's the same microaggression that Arushi was talking about. That's now taken from us, and now we have to justify that. How is Diwali a Hindu festival, right? So these are the challenges that we as kind of I would say the woke Hindus might face, right? We have to deal with having to justify these things are Hindu. Yoga is Hindu. Diwali is Hindu, right? Holi is Hindu, right? The idea that Holi can be taken for political contexts, more probably better than anyone. And Amrita ji, of course, knows as well how badly that was misused against Hindus this past semester, right, on campus. So that's the challenge that woke Hindus face. The Hindus that might not necessarily be so proud to call themselves Hindu, the issues that they may face it's going to be very similar to what we also face, but this comes kind of more broadly to everyone, which is that as Hindus, we have to kind of justify how do we feel about issues outside of the US? So this is exactly what you said, Dinesh. We often get forced to have a position on Indian politics, even though a lot of us on this call are those that were born in this country and grew up in this country, and suddenly we're kind of being looked at in a McCarthyian way and being asked to justify, oh, are you the type of Hindu that supports X, Y, and Z, right? Now, we don't even have to go into kind of the policies on this call. Like, I know all of us will have kind of a Hindu viewpoint in the sense that there's Hindu viewpoints being ignored in those positions, but the fact that we have to justify our Hindu identity, and that question consistently gets asked to us. Are you Hindutva? Are you Hindutva? Are you Hindutva? So many students are tired of it, right? Whether you're Hindu or not, all that's going to do is turn you away from that Hindu identity. So those are the two that I would mention, Prasiddha, when it comes to kind of challenges that Hindus face, whether they're kind of accepting of that Hindu identity or not, they might face some of those.
Great. Thank you so much, Arnav. So another question, this is more so geared towards Rushi or Danish. So can you first tell us what a microaggression is and give an example of a microaggression towards Hindus? This could be, in middle school, high school, or any other classroom context.
I can take the question about microaggressions within like social media too. Absolutely, there's a major shift from people being relatively silent about India and Hinduism to kind of being very aggressive and hostile towards our community recently. I think that was like, especially after the abrogation of Article 370 last year, there was a lot of misinformation and lies that were spread on social media about our community, and a lot of students were affected by that. And it also had a positive impact, I would say, in terms of waking up our youth. It kind of, I've seen a huge influx of a lot of young Hindus on social media trying to be more active about our issues now than they were before the abrogation of Article 370. There were also many mischaracterizations from the recent happenings of Black Lives Matter, issues revolving around racism, that people were saying Hindus don't care about those issues because somehow caste system was infringing upon our thoughts to care about those issues, which is not true at all. And by the way, like, caste system pervades throughout various religions in India. So it's not just in South Asia in general, and it's not just like a Hindu issue, but they made it out that way to kind of create these microaggressive statements and stances against Hindus. For example, there was a post on South Asian Nation, which is a page on Instagram, and it was basically saying, they made a post saying, if Hindus in America care about Black Lives Matter, they have to also care about issues, like Arnav said, X, Y, and Z in India. I mean, can you imagine the outrage if this happened to any other community? For example, if someone said, if Muslims in America care about Black Lives Matter, they also have to care about issues X, Y, and Z in Islamic countries around the world. I mean, that's just outrageous and so wrong, because it perpetuates these microaggressions towards our community. And what can we do about those things? I think what I've seen on social media is putting pressure on these influencer pages, commenting, DMing them. And you can do this in a very respectful way in the beginning, and they're actually willing to listen if you don't just straight up attack them. So it really works, putting pressure on them, making this network of support that will put pressure on them.
Okay, so I would also like to offer a perspective on academia. Danish does a great, way to characterize it on social media. In terms of academia, an example I see a lot is this silence about how the British and colonization had an effect on Hindu society, and then tying all the problems in Hindu society directly back to Hinduism without even looking into our scriptures. Last year in Hindu Students Council chapter in Montgomery, we looked into a textbook that is circulated widely in New Jersey, and looked into how they represented other religions versus Hinduism. Every other religion, they started with the basic tenets of their book, and whatever was seen as their history from that faith's point of view. However, with Hinduism, it started right off with the caste system. It went into Aryan theory, caste system. The only time Hindu women were mentioned was in terms of sati. And this idea of the caste system was repeated again and again and again and again. And I think the problem with this is that in academia, the people creating these textbooks, even if they are Hindu, they almost think that they're doing a service to the Hindu community by putting this in. And the fact that we have such a lack of woke Hindus creating this material goes back and hurts our kids in classrooms, because they're told that if you want to pass this class, you have to believe this about your faith. And if you are speaking out, you are denying us academic freedom. And a lot of times Hindu kids feel intimidated by the teachers to talk about this. They're like, how can I respectfully tell my teacher that what they're saying is outright wrong? And I say that if what you are saying is the truth, and your teacher, like Danish said, is open to learn, because many of them are just repeating what they've learned. They're just repeating what's in the textbook. Many of them are trying their best, others may not be, you don't really know. So if you are educated yourself, and if we can have some help in helping our youth, we can't just like throw it on them and just be like, oh, now this is on you. We need a little bit of help, a little bit of centering our voices. If we can do that, then we should be able to go and say, no, the British did not abolish sati. In the core of Hinduism is respecting women. Actually, here are the list of Hindu reformers who actually did the work. Or if someone said, for example, my teacher said colonization wasn't all that bad. They modernized India. You could say, well, first of all, a lot of your modernizations happened because of these Eastern concepts that went over there. And you should never justify any type of racial subjugation that causes human rights abuses. So if you have this mentality that as long as you speak the truth, you cannot be silenced, and as long as you do not come at these teachers for being white supremacists, racist, whatever, and you educate them along with other people, you can truly emulate Hindu values while also sticking up for Dharma and not letting people walk over you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, both Danish and Arushi. So the next question is, what would you propose people should do when confronted with cultural appropriation of Hindu traditions, and what is the fine line between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation? So this question is to you, Amrita.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of different forums where we encounter cultural appropriation of Hindu traditions. It could be in individual interactions, it could be in a group chat, it could be in school or in our workplaces, through social media or the media broadly. And I think we can also encounter cultural appreciation through those same forums. I think cultural appreciation means honoring a tradition or practice, and also understanding and acknowledging its origins and meaning in that particular culture, which is the part that's often missed out on. And I think appropriation is cherry picking for your own gain or to follow a trend, and not having an understanding or acknowledging the roots of what you may be doing. So I think there are a lot of different ways in these different forums that we can address cultural appropriation. And I would say probably calling it out in a way that you feel is most impactful and sends a clear message. I think often our approach is very reactive and defensive, which is of course also needed. I think when we see something, let's call it out, whether that's through an online petition, writing letters to companies or editors or individuals, or individually calling or messaging people who may be even in our own networks or our social media pages who've appropriated our traditions. And I think hand in hand, we should also have a proactive approach. I think what Danish and Arushi are talking about is exactly that, of creating content and sending out the message and the values that we want to send out from our voice, and not always having to go back and correct them. So this could be through reaching out to elected officials, schools, members of our community, to proactively share what our Hindu traditions are about, to come and celebrate and learn about our traditions with us, and creating content on social media or through blogs, other articles, which explain the origins of our tradition and what we stand for. So I think one key part of all of this is what I think Ganesh mentioned in his intro, the importance of having a united approach. And our approach doesn't have to look exactly the same. There are different ways that appropriation can be addressed, and we should take all of them, but one that is aligned in a common vision, and that's intended to uplift the entire Hindu community and not just for our own individual gain.
Thank you, Amrita. So a kind of like follow-up to that question is cultural appropriation type of virtue signaling, since the practices are cool, but maybe Hinduism isn't. So how have your Hindu ideals shaped your understanding of virtue signaling itself?
Great question, and a really complex question. I think there's a lot of nuance to virtue signaling. We live in a day and age where I think human psychology is constantly being manipulated. We all know there's an immense amount of data that's collected on our behaviors. The ads that you see are targeted. And we really latch on to trends because of a desire to be a part of a group and social desirability. And so I think the intention behind virtue signaling is really important. I think we see social media influencers, we see politicians who are clearly partaking in virtue signaling with no positive intention. But I think sharing our values and our ideals is important, and why not? I think for better or for worse, each one of us has a platform to express our own thoughts, share our values, our customs, our experiences with the world around us. And it can be done through a lot of different platforms. I think not everyone is totally comfortable using social media. That may not be the best route for them. And I think where virtue signaling becomes negative is when it's done out of selfishness and hypocrisy and not accompanied by action. So I think it's really clear when some actions are authentic and when ones are just for show. And then I think about at what point does it become cultural appropriation in that fine line. I think a few examples that come to mind is a white celebrity who wears a bindi or does puja is chic, but a Hindu person that does the same is orthodox. A person who religiously attends a yoga class, and using the word religiously pretty ironically, is spiritual and admired for their commitment, whereas a Hindu kid, like many of us, who might have attended a class every Sunday to learn about their dharma, is old-fashioned and backwards. And I think virtue signaling is particularly complex because Hindu values are so universal, and what we actually deem to be as basic human values of for example, universal oneness. When a person is speaking about how the whole world is one family and they're accepting of people of all backgrounds, it's accepted as virtuous and open-minded. When a Hindu describes the origins of these values in our Vedic texts, or how they are part of our everyday practices and daily life, they come off as preachy. So I think these are just a few of my thoughts around virtue signaling, a complex topic, I think, particularly for Hindus.
Thank you so much, Amrita. So the next question, I guess, since we're talking about social media and all that, this goes towards Danish. So what types of Hinduphobia have you seen in the social media or any kind of media? And what would you really suggest to Hindu youth that can help us create a change?
Oh gosh, there's a lot. Hinduphobia online has just been on an upward trend, and it's increasing steadily. And I don't even know if a lot of non-youth, as in like adults or even the older generation of Hindus, are understanding the kind of threat it poses to a lot of the new generation. But it is really, really bad. And we need to take control of that, and we need to start doing things. People are calling Hindus fascists on social media, on Instagram, like it's like a normal thing. There's a page called sasi.nyc on Instagram, and it's called the South Asian Solidarity Initiative. And basically what they do is they use their page to promote hate towards Hindus and anything Hinduism related. And they use words like, F your Ram Mandir. They say things like Hindus aren't indigenous to India, and a lot of anti-guru sentiment as well. And I think a lot of the older generation aren't even realizing that it's not so much just about, like, for example, anti-Modi or anti-political or anti-India rhetoric. It's really challenging our existence as who we are as people. And we need to take this seriously. They really use a lot of nasty language, and a lot of South Asian pages outright reject the trauma that our community is facing and has faced for centuries. A lot of people online reject and say that Kashmiri Hindus are lying when they talk about their trauma of persecution and genocide that them and their families have gone through in Kashmir for so many generations. But like, what can we do to make a change? I think we have to get creative. And I'll tell you something I did recently, and we can all do like something creative. But recently there were anti-Shia persecution rallies held in Pakistan. And I saw a lot of Shia influencers online raising voice for the Shia community. So I basically reached out to a lot of these influencers who have like 10,000, 20,000 followers. And I gave them information about the persecution happening on Hindus in Pakistan. And I sent them really well-balanced, well-written, well-articulated posts to highlight our issues. So what these influencers did was they related their community struggle to our struggles, and they posted about our issues. And I think it was a huge win, because I would have never expected, Shia Muslims to talk about Hindu persecution around the world. So we need to think along those lines. Another thing we can do is start being active on social media. We can use your talents. If you're passionate about music, singing, doing makeup, or making funny videos on TikTok, whatever it is, we need to get involved and start building a platform for ourselves. And then once you build a platform, you have to establish credibility by highlighting societal issues such as environmental justice, gender equality, stuff like that resonates with the larger population in the world. And then you can use that influence to talk about Hindu issues as well, so people relate to those issues with our community's issues. And we have to approach this in a very strategic way and bring about a change through social media.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So the next question is to Arushi. So when it comes from a professor or teacher, do you think that a student should respond? And if so, how? And how do we equip a student to be confident and respond respectfully to someone of authority? So this also has to do with kind of like microaggressions in academia, particularly towards Hindus.
Okay, so I think absolutely you should respond, because even if you are a student from that teacher, just because someone is in a higher position in academia does not mean they are as decolonized as you may be, or they may be actively upholding a colonized narrative and an anti-Hindu narrative, to put it very blatantly, because of their own interests. It really depends on whether the teacher is just going along with the narrative, or if they're the ones who are actively pushing that narrative. And how do you equip students to be confident and respond respectfully? I really think that sometimes you need spaces for only Hindu students. And I've seen that if you have places where Hindu students can talk to each other about what is actually going on with Hindus around the world, and also what is authentic information on Hinduism, if you have that solidarity within the classroom among Hindu students, so that when a Hindu student is bullied by peers or by a teacher, you don't just look the other way. Or if you see incorrect information, you stand up for it. I know this seems a bit repetitive, but I'm saying this over and over again, because no matter how many times I say it, if this is not emulated in action, nothing is going to happen. So it could be as simple as, for example, in English classes, we do presentations about relating current events to books, right? So if you have a book about injustice, give a shout out to Kashmiri Hindus. Educate your classroom on the gaslighting they face, right? In history class, we were talking about world issues, and I saw a perfect way in order, because we were talking about, I believe, what was it? We were talking about how Black people in America were kind of struggling over how to decolonize themselves in the period after Reconstruction, right? And then a lot of people were drawing parallels between slavery and colonization, because effectively it's colonization within the country of African Americans. So I said this mentality that the oppressed people have to present themselves as nonviolent, or have to present themselves as these people that they have to justify why they don't have to be oppressed, is something that you see in colonized countries all over the world. In fact, one person in my class who's not Indian brought up a parallel between oppressed Hindus in India and then slavery in America. Of course, this is not trying to draw the direct equalities between the Black struggle and the Hindu struggle. But once you see people who are not even Hindu, like people who are from other communities also standing up for decolonizing us, and you can also go and have conversations with them, it's when you take away that fear of having to be this very small niche of woke Hindus and expanding it and being very unapologetic about this, that you can go even up to someone of high authority and say, hey, what you're teaching is actually wrong. Let's have a discussion about why this is affecting us and why you are not upholding your standards of having a safe space for minorities. Sorry, that was a little long. It's a very heavy subject.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Arushi. So now I'm going to go back to Arnav and ask another question. This is kind of like related as well. So what are things you would suggest to help a student confidently be able to identify as a Hindu American? And what advice would you give to older generations to help our young people?
So for the first piece, I think the short answer would be a lot of times young Hindus that are growing up and already might be proud to call themselves Hindu American or Hindus in this country, a lot of times we neglect that American aspect of our identity, right? What does it mean to be a Hindu American, right? So not just what are our dharmic principles, our dharmic values, what is it, what are the reasons that we read Gita, or what are the reasons that we celebrate Diwali, or whatever it might be. We don't look at that in the American context, right? So as I think Arushi just very nicely mentioned, like not being apologetic and building those bridges and being able to look at our Hindu identity in the broader scope of kind of the communities we live in, and how do we contribute back to, American civilization as American citizens. We are not just American citizens, we are Hindu American citizens, right? So being able to kind of bridge that divide and not being apologetic about being a Hindu American and letting that influence how we might look at things that overlap in a lot of ways, such as like American democracy, free speech, right? I think, Danish, you were saying like topics like environment and gay rights and abortion. Those are all big issues in the US. And a lot of times we don't necessarily allow our Hindu values to we don't let our Hindu values kind of seep into that discussion, right? So how do we allow modern topics to be discussed through our Hindu identity? I think that's how we really establish pride in that kind of facet of our identity, is allowing it to be kind of an all-inclusive identity. In terms of the second piece of that question, I think it's actually interesting because someone in the chat mentioned like the challenges. I think Satyaji mentioned the challenges that they're having with connecting with their children, and the fact that their children might be seeing certain things in areas like Brown Girls Magazine is a big one, right? Like I know Arushi and Prasiddha, I know both of you probably are well aware of that one. But there's many other magazines like that where it kind of covers some of the Indic topics, but it doesn't do so from a Hindu lens. It does it from the South Asian lens, which a lot of times there's kind of nefarious people sending things like the ones that Danish is mentioning on social media, right? Very cool names that sound very good, but then they submit content and it goes up there, right? So how do we as I'm not a parent, how do parents kind of educate the next generation of youth and get them to connect with our Hindu community, right? And I think the biggest challenge there is the language barrier. Not necessarily that there's different languages like, in India or other parts of the world that we might speak, but I mean in terms of the language we use to describe issues that affect our community. So one very good example is the elections. With the elections coming up, I know it's a very heated topic in the Hindu community with a lot of and across the world, right? It's a very heated topic with which side might have the best interests for Hindu Americans in mind, right? Now, that's not something we can necessarily evaluate on this discussion, but the fact is that a lot of parents might have different views in their children, right? Just because we grow up in a very liberal environment and we go to schools where everyone has kind of a liberal lens, and the language we hear is going to be very specific, right? It's going to be rooted in social justice and equality and those values which we want to come from our Hindu identity, but we might not know how to describe them. And so the biggest challenge I see is that parents need to be able to understand that when they speak to their kids and talk about issues like the elections or other matters that affect us as Hindu Americans, they need to be able to connect on the language and on the turf that their kids are on, right? It can't be done from the turf that they're on, which is the Indian political scene, where terms like secularism and leftism and those types of terms have a different meaning in India than they do in the US context. And we need to meet youth on the turf that they understand here, and be able, even if you don't agree with your kids on something like the elections, be open, be vulnerable with them, and let that conversation happen. Because if you don't empower them to have those conversations and have a different opinion than you, then they are going to think, okay, my parents are disagreeable with me, I don't want to be a Hindu, right? That's how that mindset slowly seeps in, is I don't feel empowered to be a Hindu. So we need to empower that generation to have these conversations, and sometimes they'll have a different view. That's okay.
Yeah, that's really great. Thank you so much, Arnav. So the last question is actually towards Danish. So do you believe that recent events and movements have exacerbated the spread of microaggressions against Hinduism? So this could be like BLM, any kind of like caste racism, and the Kashmir issue in particular.
Yeah, I think I already highlighted this a little bit earlier. But yes, after the abrogation of Article 370, there was definitely a huge shift in the narrative of how people view Hindus, India, and Hinduism in general. And, you know, as a result, a lot of youth have also woken up and taken charge of the narrative. And I'm seeing a lot more activity on social media from young Hindus to counter that narrative. Especially in terms of Black Lives Matter, the example I gave was the South Asian nation example, and how they, you know, kind of said that if you are Hindu in America and if you care about Black lives, you also have to care about these issues in South Asia. So yes, a lot of these issues, a lot of people are conflating them and saying, you know, if you're for this issue, you can't be for this issue. If you're Hindu, you can't be for, you know, for Black lives for some reason, or gay rights, or any of these issues that are quote unquote liberal because you're a Hindu. And I think we need to counter that aggressively and say, you know, we are Hindus and we are all inclusive, and we're not hateful towards other communities at the same time.
Great, thank you. So a question that actually came in the Q&A. So yeah, we're done with all of these questions. So I'm just gonna go to one that we got in the Q&A as quickly as possible. So someone asked, what can we do about sadhana representing itself as an authentic Hindu voice, especially with the Ram Mandir issue? So I'm gonna, you know, give that over to Arushi to answer.
Okay, so I want to be a little nice here. So one thing we see is that a lot of people who join sadhana are generally trying to be good Hindus. All right, even though the platform is disagreeable, they're trying to be progressive Hindus. They want to help change. They want to help these issues. But what they don't see is that promise of being progressive, as Danish said, people who are on the progressive side, they kind of use that as kind of like a curtain to hide behind, to go around to go around and then go and malign Hindus, right? For example, they'll say a lot of things about, of course, Ambedkar is a very, important historical figure. So you say people saying, if you believe in Ambedkar, you have to accept that all upper castes are a different race than the lower castes, and quote unquote. Do you guys know that the Aryan invasion theory has been contested and debunked so many times by even people who you would think are such as Ambedkar? And you see people like Sadhana, when they talk about issues such as Kashmir, they completely gaslight their own people. They completely deny that the Kashmiri Hindu genocides ever happened. They align themselves with groups such as Equality Labs, who have directors who think that Hinduism is inherently classist and do not speak about the exodus of Hindus from Bangladesh. So I think that we have to abide by our values, that it is your actions that speak, your actions that uphold Dharma that speak. you cannot, just because someone calls themselves to be progressive does not mean they are progressive. You have to look at their actions and whether their activism is truly inclusive of everyone, including their own community. So I think that you just need to kind of tell Hindu youth that standing up for your dharma is not, standing up for your people is not violent, and do not let anyone tell you so. And in these conversations, try not to attack, be very respectful, bring up actual historical facts, and just whatever you do, know that dharma rakshita rakshati. If you protect dharma and if you protect Hindus who need protecting, you will always be on the right side of history.
Great, thank you so much, Arush. Oh, sorry, I put myself back on mute. So now we're going to do the final remarks of the panel. So I'm going to start with Arnav.
Yeah, I mean, it's very exciting to be on this panel because Amrita ji and I, obviously we know each other from World Hindu Congress and all of our time together in HSC and Yuva, and it's awesome to see Prasiddha, Danish, you guys are the next generation of college student leaders, and then Arushi. Very excited to have you as the next generation of high school leaders that are going to take forward not only HSC but any kind of pan-Hindu youth initiative in this country. I know they're in good hands. I'm glad to see that we're starting to open up from, like you said, Arushi, not just we do need our closed spaces for Hindus to kind of be able to talk about issues and allow ourselves to decolonize, but then also start moving into other spaces and taking that Hindu identity with us and being able to confidently discuss those. I'm starting to see that, and I'm very optimistic that the next generation is going to take this to a whole new level.
Thank you, Arnav. So Danish?
I just want to say, as Hindus, we need to start creating our space on social media. I think that's one of the most important things we can do in this digital age, and that's how youth are actually connecting. So we have to kind of occupy that space and be a voice for Hindus on that social media front. And we have to start creating our space in a very goal-oriented way. Whatever content we post on social media should have a clear and tangible influence that we're looking to make. And if we're not making the mark or seeing the influence, we need to reevaluate our strategies, which I'm not seeing much on social media today. We kind of tend to stay in our bubbles and kind of resist that change because we're too comfortable being in that, in our niche. So we need to measure our success by the metric of how many people outside of our bubbles are being influenced from our social media content, and not so much about how much praise we get from our own people inside our little bubbles. We can do something. We can all do something to create a change, and we can use our talents. Our talents can be used to make a social media platform, and then build it, and then start using your voice to voice for Hindu issues, and in a very strategic way. So yeah, that's how we're going to see an impact. We all have to do our part and kind of realize what the situation is with social media.
Thank you, Danish. Amrita?
Well, first, it's been a pleasure to be on this panel, and I think the topics that were chosen and the questions, and also so many questions coming in on the Q&A are so unique and different than probably conversations that we as a Hindu community were having 5 or even 10 years ago. And I think this is a really good sign. And I think everything that all the panelists have mentioned today and the types of conversations we're having, I think place the responsibility on each and every one of us as Hindus to confidently stand for our values, bring about awareness about our origins, our roots, and defend our community and our values where we see unjust appropriation. And I think the environment is really ripe right now. And I think we as a community are shifting to proactively having our voice represented. And this can be through social media or in individual conversations, but I think especially for us as youth, in the types of career paths that we choose. If we have challenges in academia, let's become teachers and professors and administrators. If we have problems with how Hindus are being represented in the media, let's become journalists and filmmakers.
if we don't see ourselves being represented in pop culture, let's become musicians and artists. And I think most importantly, each one of us should feel an ownership and responsibility for representing and shaping the Hindu American voice in particular. And I think we can and we are standing together and united in this effort.
Thank you so much. Arushi?
I think Arnav, Danish, and Amrita have already said a lot, so I'll just say whatever I have. I really think that as long as Hindu students from a young age, we should not be afraid to discuss things like caste and sexism with them. And you need to answer, as long as we answer all of these questions by the time they're in 6th grade. I know it seems like kind of like homework I'm giving back to parents, but as long as our youth from a very young age are taught that their Hindu identity is something you should not be scared of. You should be able to say, I'm a Hindu American. You don't have to, like Arna was saying, do not hide behind, oh, I'm a South Asian American, not a Hindu American. Right? As long as you own that identity, and you know that as long as you come from dharmic decolonizing resources, because we have so many, we have an exhausted list of these resources. We just need to take action. We need to talk more about this, and as long as you establish a connection with teachers, and now there's this huge movement across the United States to have anti-racism curriculum and decolonized curriculum. Decolonization is a word that's being used a lot by anti-racists in the movement to represent Indigenous people and Black people in America. If you also recognize that most of our history is being colonized, because some people have mentioned slavery of Indians for 1,000 years, Kashmiri genocides, Bangladeshi genocides, etc., etc. If you identify yourself in there and you're unapologetic about recognizing the truth of history, as long as you emulate that through your actions and you don't just aren't behind the scenes, you emulate that in your everyday life, where we can see a lot of progress. That's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you so much to all of our viewers as well. I'm going to hand it back over to Shohini.